that's why I went. I went for the education. I learned with the Rav. I learned Moshe Shemar. But I remember the RA. Jeff Botnick. I don't know if you know Jeff Botnick.
Sound familiar, but a friend of mine who worked together with Jonathan Berger.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I interviewed at Shalom Tzedek a few days after he left because at that point I was turning 49 and they wanted a 28-year-old. You know how that works. You know that story? They went down and sized it. That's what they wanted me to go to. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's I was supposed to do the West Point thing. They were like I was like I said, they ran their synagogues, their businesses like they run the synagogues. They would be bankrupt. That's it.
When you read the story,
No, no, it was about 11. Absolutely. So that was then, but I had this nice mix because it was like a weekend with senior citizens, so there wasn't a lot of the extra stuff that I had to do. And then we covered hospice.
but you were an educator.
I was an educator here. I worked here for 16 years when the Hebrew schools were 6 hours a week, 3 days a week.
Wonderful, in the 80s and 90s.
I ran, it used to be called the Midrashah community, then it was Midrashah, then it became, I started Machon. I don't think it exists anymore. I started the Machon. Yeah, so I got all that going, but I got out because I realized that there was no more career for education directors. I jumped, that career is dead. He came after me. Yeah, what?
The backbone of education,
Yeah.
people coming and going.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, nothing is. Yeah. I was here 16 years. My children, we just took them to see it again. And when we were here, I was teaching 42 Hebrew school. The kids would go through Hebrew school, and then they go into the Midrashah community next door. And in 10th, 11th grades, we were giving preaching some Hebrew. Then we would start. Okay, my wife was here almost 10 years. But those days are gone. Can't even think about it. I got to go see the family.
Okay.
But that's it. Then after that, I just started working hospice full time. And it was, but that got to a point, it's enough. You hit
There's
70,
a point.
You hit 70, it's enough. But
No, same here. Rabbi, you going to the shiva tomorrow? to talk to you. Please find your seats. Interment will be at Mount Hope Cemetery. The family will be gathering for Shiva today from 7 to 9, tomorrow, Friday, from 2 to 5 p.m., Sunday from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9 p.m. at 320 Council Rock Avenue. If you further wish to honor the memory of Peggy R. Blumenthal, you may do so by making donations to Blasport Memory Library, PJ Library, Jewish National Fund, University of Pennsylvania Class of 1969 Fund, Temple Bethel, or the charity of your choice. Kol omer kara ve'amar ma'ekra. כל הבשר חציר וכל חסדו כציץ השדה. יבש חציר, נבל ציץ כרוח אדוני נשבע בו. לכן חציר העם, יבש חציר נבל ציץ, ודבר אלוהינו יקום לעולם. We live and we die. That is the pattern of nature. Sometimes death comes too early, spoiling hopes and dreams. Sometimes it comes when we least expect it, interrupting success and stability. Sometimes it comes in our senior years, concluding what is already complete. We pay our tribute to our dear Peggy, active participant at Temple Bethel services, at our beloved sisterhood, and and at many of our musical events. She was such a close and dear friend. No matter how brief, no matter how long, life is supremely important. Every person is unique. She was unique. Every biography is special. She will always have a place in our minds and our hearts. She survives in the freshness of our memories. For the service we're about to start, we welcome Beverly and dear Rabbi Rose. This levaya be an expression of our loyalty to Peggy. May this moment make us sensitive to our needs for one another. May the death of one we love so much encourage us to foster life. We regard the life of Peggy and her Yiddishkeit as a unique link in the chain of vital existence. We honor Friedel Henia Bat Ze'ev Wolf V'Sheina Basha always with the gift of remembrance.
And so we've come here today to remember Peggy, but most important, to say goodbye. Wife to Dan for 31 years, mother to Shira and Ben, Ilana and Shmuel, grandmother to David and Hannah, Tzipora and Gabriela, sister to Regina, companion for some 15 years to Ron, and of course, the daughter of Bess and Bill Raskin, who sat in this sanctuary as well. So yes, we're here to say goodbye. Now I remember having done many services for the family. The first time that I did the funeral was, I believe, for Bill, and before it began, Peggy had a special request, and I had to remember it as we came to this. And it's going to go as follows. We always read the 23rd Psalm, but Peggy wanted it the old-fashioned way. So if you remember it as such and can join in, please feel free to do so. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And we read from the book of Proverbs, a good wife who can find, her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. She extends her hand to the poor. She is robed in strength and dignity and faces whatever may come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. She tends to the affairs of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her, and her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a God-revering woman is much to be praised. Place before her the fruit of her hands. Wherever people gather, her deeds shall speak her praise. We should not fear death, as we are destined to die. We share it with all who live, with all who ever lived, and with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead. Do not hide your grief, do not restrain your mourning, but remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory rest and be consoled when the soul departs, for death is better than a life of pain. Eternal rest is better than constant sickness. Our God, you redeem our souls from the grave. You are the rock of our foundation and our salvation. Forsake us not in time of trouble and days of distress and desolation. Help us to endure, O Lord, for we have placed our hope in you. And so, yes, we are here to say goodbye, and members of family have words they wish to share. So, Ron, if you'd like to come up at this point, thank you.
So let me try to tell you a little bit about Peggy. A wonderful woman, a remarkable soul. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about where we traveled and what made Peggy so unique. I'm going to start at our kitchen table. Next to the kitchen table is a wall with a bunch of stuff on it, but on the bottom is a little plaque. On the right side of the plaque is etched a little saying, and on the left side of the plaque is a photograph, a black and white photograph, probably from 1959, 1960, and there are two young people in there. They're probably about 11 years old, just like Peggy's youngest grandchild. And they're standing there and they're smiling and they're happy together. And it's lovely to look at a picture that has been saved for 65 years in perfect condition. Who does that? Peggy does that. But let's fast forward a half a century, 50 years, to 2 hours outside of Minsk, Belarus, where a couple is huddled together, holding each other in the drizzle and the cold, rededicating a Jewish cemetery where her forefathers had come from. That is Peggy. Or when we were in Panama, like a lot of tourists, you go on one of those buses and they've got 44 people and they schlep you here and they schlep you there. But not Peggy. She goes, psst. She gets the tour guide. Come here. She says, could you go out of your way a little bit? He says, lady, no, I've got my route. I can't, no. She says, I want to go to where the U.S. Army soldiers used to be, because my husband Dan was stationed here. She made 44 other people schlep to the U.S. Army barracks. And with this bus, it's a gesunde bus. We're going up and down the streets until Peggy says, stop. This is where Dan used to be. That was Peggy. Or when we went to London. Now, London is a gorgeous city, but we went to the bowels of a building, underground, where Winston Churchill had his war room. Peggy was an avid reader, and the best things that she liked to read was about World War II. She is now living that experience because in the war room, when the war was over, they preserved everything but exactly the way that it was. So all of these things she adored, and maybe our greatest trip ever is when we went to China. Most of you know that Peggy was not a gigantic, a very tall woman. She was, quote, not athletic, but there's the great China Wall. How would she possibly scale this hurdle? But Peggy was a determined woman. If there was a challenge, if there was a hurdle that she had to scale, she would figure out how to do it. And she and I ambled up that wall, and there she was, in her glory, looking out because she was able to do it. That was also Peggy. Now, the last trip that she took was after she became ill, after she became weak. How would she possibly, in March of 2022, be able to make a trip to Tampa, Florida, because her two eldest grandchildren were going to be B'nai Mitzvah? But she did. She found the strength. Was it hard? Yes, it was. Was it difficult? Yes, it was. But she was a woman who was determined that when she put her mind to something, there was no hurdle. There was nothing too difficult for her to accomplish. So I want to start to end my remarks with the last stanza of a poem, and the two I'd like to listen the most to are Hannah and David, who is listening to this being streamed. This was the essence of your grandmother when she was faced with something difficult. This is the last stanza of a poem by Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And that would ordinarily be where I would finish my talk. But I didn't tell you one thing. Go back to that plaque, the one that sits next to the kitchen table. I told you about the photograph of those two youngsters from the late 1950s. And what does the etching say? Of all the world's greatest love stories, ours is my favorite. Thank you.
Ben?
I'm going to start by reading a few words that my wife wrote, that Shira wrote, Peggy's daughter. Let's see how this goes here. My mom was never one to miss a simcha or a funeral. She got such joy from being with friends and families at these gatherings. Too many people in the world complain about their families. My mother loved hers so deeply. She was a devoted daughter to her parents. All of you cousins here today were so near and dear. I know when she was sick, all she wanted was to have a cousin's dinner. She adored her grandchildren to no end and had such plans for showing them the world. Her last trip to Tampa for Chana and David's B'nai Mitzvah was done by sheer will, as Ron just explained. And my mom just accumulated friends. Once you were her friend, you better be ready because it's for life. Apparently, Ron learned this lesson quite well. There are people here today from elementary school, high school, from Penn, from when she first moved to Rochester, and from more recent years as well. She maintained connections. She went to all her Penn reunions. She traveled to Duxchitz to see the place where her grandparents came from. We all know about her pilgrimages to Blossburg to visit the family homestead. She loved genealogy and relished making new connections and doing research in the archives and traveling to family cemeteries to find a new piece of information on a worn headstone to put into the latest family tree. And of course, there's Council Rock, the home she grew up in, that she came back to, and where she achingly wanted to return to in her final days. She was the most generous person. She had a gift for gift giving. She got extreme joy from sending cards for all occasions and having gifts for Hanukkahs, 2, 3 Hanukkahs in the future, ready to go. And I want to say that I am so grateful that all of you gave back with wonderful cards and drawings and flowers and visits to pepper up during her illness. The window ledge at the hospital was not nearly big enough to hold all the cards she got, and for this our family is grateful. And thank you all for coming from far and wide to be with her, whether physically or virtually. The whole encompassing representation of people who loved her is simply beautiful. Mom didn't have a smartphone, and we made sure to, Mom didn't have a smartphone, and we sure made fun of her flip phone. But she mastered her tablet, and she would take photos of her wonderful trips with Ron, and even learned to Zoom and Skype to her children and grandchildren. I feel that this was a huge leap from someone who, when she first got a computer, called me in a panic because she came over to a blank screen when I was not home. She was puzzled what to do. She called me up. Shira notes that she took the phone call on her car phone. And in my most obnoxious voice, I said, "Move the damn mouse." She loved that story and would always tell me how much she's improved technologically since that day. Well, Mom, I wish now that waking you up would be as easy as moving that damn mouse. But I am so thankful that you're able to rest in peace. So, as Shira noted, one of my mother-in-law's superpowers was gift giving. Growing up, I can picture it very vividly. She gave my parents this ceramic Scrabble board that had the letters that spelled out our names and hobbies and things that were important in our life. And I remember growing up as a child and just marveling at this. How would you do this? How would you think of all the right things to fill up all the right spots and connect them up? And I would come to appreciate that was just quintessential Peggy. She could do that. For her, a gift wasn't checking something off. It wasn't just a thing. It was an expression of love. I also learned as an adult how she could pull that off, and that's because she was an avid crossword puzzler. And in fact, even in the last few days of her life, when her body had just failed her, she still had the crossword puzzle mind. We could still group crossword puzzles together and still get pleasure from it. It was amazing. And I have to say, one of her most impressive gift maneuvers was that she passed away the day after Father's Day, and yet I got a Father's Day gift this year. A beautiful blue Land's End polo shirt. How did she do it? She did it planning 3 Hanukkahs ahead, with her amazing network of friends, which was far and wide. Thank you, Beverly. And pure determination. But of all the gifts she gave, to me, that of being a loving mother-in-law is at the top of the list. She was always in my corner. I can't pinpoint when I felt like family, because I've always felt like family. As I stand here today, the place where I had Hebrew school graduation, my bar mitzvah, my wedding, I was here and Peggy was there, always. But I will say that there is a little bit of family lore. Before Shira and I were married, before we were engaged, before we were even dating, I called up Shira to see if she would go on a run with me. And this was in the old days, kids, where you didn't call the person, you called the house. I called the house, and Peggy picked up, and I'm sure I said in my most confident voice, "Is Shira there?" And I didn't hear this part, but the legend goes that Peggy turned to Shira and said, "It's Ben Simon, be nice." And that's what she was. She was always on my side. She gave us an amazing wedding, and she helped as we packed up our lives into a little U-Haul truck. And my brother David remembers that we would learn that for Peggy, details mattered. We would go in to get a box, and she would hand us a box and say, "Okay, this box is fragile." "Okay, got it. And then she'd come back and say, no, this box is extra fragile." "What do I do with this?" No, this one is super extra fragile. And on it went. And for her, these things mattered. She had it all figured out. And maybe in the moment I didn't appreciate it, but now, again, I see it as an absolute expression of her love. When we became foster parents, she could have been forgiven if we explained, yes, we're going to have these children in our home, if she was a little wary about it, not for a millisecond. She was a foster grandma like that, and the children in our lives have benefited having a Grandma Peggy. We're so fortunate. And of course, when she would visit us, I could always depend on her to go to a museum or a battlefield with me. While my wife was on the side reading a book, Peggy and I could soak up the history. There was a trip I took when I'm guessing middle school. We went up to a Blue Jays game. And again, this speaks to the fact that we were just, who does that? Who takes the child of a friend out of the country to a baseball game? But that we were close. It just seemed totally natural to do. So we go up to the baseball game, have a good time, and we're driving back, and we get to the border. We get near the border. And things were more lax then. We didn't have a passport or anything like that. But even as a kid, I knew this was serious business at the border. And maybe, I'm not quite sure what happened, but maybe the adults started to figure out, okay, are we under the $100? Maybe start asking them, how much money did we spend or whatever. Whatever happened, Peggy noticed I looked a little worried. What's going on here? I didn't know what was happening. Is something bad happening? And Peggy, I just have this memory of her just saying, "Oh, no, honey, everything's fine. Nothing to worry about." And it was this tiny moment. It happened. It probably meant nothing to her. But this is what I got for my life. I have this person who supported me and loved our marriage and loved my wife. And it just was her. And we're so blessed and so thankful. And we will miss Peggy immensely.
And so, yes, we've come here today to say goodbye to Peggy. It's so difficult to do, but let's be honest, it was never easy to say goodbye to Peggy. If she called you on the phone and the conversation went on, and you said, well, gee, I think I have to say goodbye. Think of that as the 45-minute warning buzzer to the end of the conversation. Or what if you weren't home and she had to leave you a message? It was not, hi, it's Peggy, call me back. It was, hi, it's Peggy. And then she told you everything that she was going to tell you if she had the conversation with you. And then when the tape ran out or the thing beeped, she called back and finished the story. Those famous words, oh, wait, just one more thing. And I remember the nights that she would show up at our door at 9:30 p.m., that was early, with Dan and Cheer and Alana, and sat down at the dining room table and started talking with Beverly. And as I tell this story, there's a confession I have to make. You see, Dan and I, we used to sleep together. Not what some of you might be thinking. Because you see, as she was talking, and at a certain point, Dan would say, Peggy, it's getting late, we should go. Peggy would reply, yes, dear, which meant, so what, who cares? And Dan and I sitting on the couch, as the hour got later, eventually our heads tilted back. He was on one end, I was on the other end, and we were snoring away. And I think that was great for her, because then she didn't have to end the conversation. Now, saying goodbye to Peggy was never easy. It was never easy for her. I mean, she kept the answering machine of her father to remember his voice. But then again, how could it be easy to say goodbye to her? It's a wonderful thing that was once written by Albert Einstein. Some of you may have heard it, that goes as follows. Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that we are here for the sake of others, above all for those upon whose smile and well-being our own happiness depends, and for the countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected by a bond of sympathy. Many times a day I realize how much my outer and inner life is built upon the labors of other people, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received and am still receiving. And that's what she did. She exerted herself to give back as much as she had received, because she was indeed with everyone. Having grown up as an adopted only child, family, of course, meant everything to her. She knew and kept touch with every cousin, with their children, with their children's children, never forgetting to send a card, to buy a unique gift, always talking about them to her friends like it was all part of the same family. You know, this friend is my family, that friend's my family, you're all the same family. You should know that as well. The fact of the matter is, the best way I can describe it is that she seemed to adopt herself into the families of her friends. She just entered into it. She adopted herself. You are now my family. That's the way it is. And then, of course, then she knew everything about everyone, never forgetting the birthday or the anniversary and the cards and the gifts. And when she did finally discover much later her own family, actual blood family, what a moment it was for her. And as have been mentioned, yes, the gifts. As I see it, Peggy had an addiction. That addiction was craft shows. She worked them as part of her business in the Beehive and others. But I suspect she spent all of her earnings just buying gifts for other people while she was at that craft show. You see, Peggy never ever believed in sending cash as a gift. It had to be something that she thought was so unique and so appropriate to that individual. Now, I have to admit, I once heard someone say, I hope it's not another special plate. We already have a whole dinner service of non-matching special plates. And I do know at one point she started sending a certain individual gift cards instead of the gifts, but I suspect she bought those because she had already bought everything unique and individual she could have found for that person. There was nothing left to do. And yes, as has been alluded to, in that house in Council Rock, there are boxes filled with gifts yet to be sent because she bought them and she put them away and they're going to be sent out. And yes, you guys got to send them out now. You know that because that's just part of honoring what she does. If you don't do that, you're going to make her so mad. And yes, Peggy was loyal, so loyal. As mentioned, she was in touch with her sorority sisters and alumni from UPenn and even from Wharton Business School, not the Donald, but others. She was loyal to Temple Bethel and her Jewish traditions and loyal to all of her family traditions. That's why she went down to Blasberg. That's why she explored this stuff, because that was so important to her. And if you ever spoke to her, you always noticed that at some point she was quoting Billisms and Bessisms and Danisms, quoting things that they said, quoting things that they had done. She sort of had her own strange Yiddish vocabulary. I never quite figured it out. Never forgetting the inviolate traditions here of Temple Bethel in Rochester, and indeed of Rochester itself. She was a Rochester patriot, the best I can say it. But as stated above, for Peggy, it was always about other people. Even in her business, the Beehive, she got a customer. Next thing you know, that customer was her friend, to the point that she got them the invitations, got them the things, and then she got herself invited to the affair. You know, I remember when the Beehive finally closed, my monthly expense ledger finally decreased. Because you know what? Peggy knew how to sell. She was good at it. She knew how to charm. She was good at it. She didn't know how to bill. I would get a bill for 6 months at a time, but she never complained about the slow payoff, I mean. And yes, you know what? In the true word, she was always a lady. You told her something, it was confidential. You didn't have to worry about it getting out. And up until recent years, I don't think I had ever seen her in pants. She always had a dress on. She always had, even in the hot weather, she'd have to put on her hose and everything else. And as the wife of Dan, a man who could quote you, shall we say, a few choice words to express his displeasure, until her illness, Peggy never did. Never used bad language. So no, it's not easy to say goodbye to Peggy, for she did indeed have that special bond of sympathy with so many people. She built her life upon the lives of others and exerted herself to give in return as much as she has received. So in the end, especially for the family and friends, there was a very simple solution to her life. I can't believe that's happening. I thought I turned it off. I apologize. She had a very simple solution to her life. If you were happy, she was happy. If you had what you needed, she had what she needed. Now, you may not always agree to what you needed, but that's what she did. She wanted you to be happy. She wanted to make sure that you had everything that you needed. So no, it's not easy to say goodbye, but maybe in a certain way, we really don't have to. There's an old saying I once heard that goes as follows. When a person passes away, they actually pass away 3 times. The first time is when they physically die. The second time is today, when we do their funeral. But in the end, they don't really die completely until the last person who knew them speaks about them, the last person who knows them tells their stories. And so that's your job now. It's your job to keep her going, to keep her alive, to tell the stories, 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 to keep her alive, to t And as we told the stories here, some people were laughing, and you know what, that's great, because you know she'd rather you think about her and smile and laugh than think about her and be sad and cry. And maybe some things will happen that'll make you think of her. Yes, you may get a package that says fragile, handle with care, and you'll remember the story that Ben told or something like that. You hear about somebody who went to China, and you'll say, yeah, I remember somebody who went to China, what that happened. Or maybe you'll see a movie about Panama, and you'll think about the things. It doesn't matter what it is, because all of these things, or you hear some strange Yiddish phrase and say, what was that? My friend used to say this. Every time that happens, you're keeping her alive. Every time you think about her and smile, you're keeping her alive. So as long as you tell those stories, and as long as you smile when you think of her, you really never have to say the final goodbye. And may her memory be a blessing. And we say, Amen. And we rise now for the closing prayer. El maled achamim shochen bamromihim ametzemen nuchen tachachen veshchina ba ma'alok kadoshim atorin kazah harakia mazhirim et nishmat Freda henya bat ze wolf shena basha shal chalolama bagan eden tehe menuchataha ana balachri masirepesete kana fechlolomihim utzro betzro chaim et nishmata Adonai hu nachalata vatanoch b'shalom amishkavaha V'nomar Amen.
Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Peggy R. Blumenthal, who's gone to her eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that she performed in the land of the living. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is her portion. May she now rest in peace. And let us say all together, Amen.